Thank you, and welcome, and thanks for joining us for this Q&A after Breathing at the Boundaries premiere. We're here to answer questions and to hear your comments, however you would like to share them. You enter your questions and comments into the chat function that's at the bottom. There's a chat button at the bottom there if you're relatively new to Zoom, which probably few of you are at this point. Your mics will be muted, and so we don't actually hear you. You'll have to put in your questions and comments into the chat, and those are going to be relayed to me, and then I will convey them to the participants. Joining us here that you will see on the screen will be the dancers, the various artists and collaborators who worked on making this piece possible. If you have any technical difficulties communicating your question or anything like that, you can send an email to keegan@mjdc.org. That's KEGAN at mjdc.org. And I think we're basically ready to just get started. I'm going to pose a first question. I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I'm going to ask Margie can you tell us a little bit about the timeline and the inspirations for making this work?
Well, the timeline started in March when it was clear, given COVID, its beginning really just before we understood the full impact it was going to have. And we started working on Global Moves, our next big work, on Zoom. And the dancers responded to various prompts that were given. We had had 1 week of rehearsal in the studio, up close and personal, before we had to stop and go to Zoom. And we continued our process on Zoom. And the dancers, were doing wonderful things and making really interesting responses by themselves, of course, in their own rooms, but then communicating with each other and making things and sharing videos with one another. And then there just was a very clear point for me, which had nothing to do with them because they were extraordinary, where I just felt the frustration of not being able to be up close and personal in some way. And so I posed the question to everybody, whether they would be willing to work kind of one-on-one with me, if I was willing to go to wherever they would be comfortable, whether it was, outside on a deck, in different situations in San Francisco where they would feel safe. And they all agreed that they would, and they all had different parameters that were important to them that we follow. And so we continued working in that way for a number of months. And then we went, there were a number of dancers who felt okay working at Pulse Studios, since it's a very large space and had ventilation as long as we followed the protocols. And so 4 of the dancers were okay about working with one another in Pulse space, which we did about twice a week. And other dancers, I went to the various locations, most of which you saw in the video, to work with them individually. And that's really kind of what the trajectory of building the material and in terms of working with the dancers directly was about. I mean, that was the sequence. And as some of you know, it was originally planned as a kind of live streaming event where 4 of the dancers would be live dancing in Pulse Studio, and the others who had been filmed at the various locations that we had rehearsed in would then be projected as they were in the video. But it became, really clear as the COVID restrictions increased and as the number of cases developed that everybody was really less and less comfortable with the idea of spending long hours with one another in the studio, which is what the live stream really would have demanded, just the way any performance does. You have to spend 8-10 hours together to make it work. And so it was really important to honor everybody's feelings about that, and to take a break, which we took around November 10th, and to kind of reconsider how we could move forward and still complete this project, but honor different people's concerns about being in close proximity. And so after taking a break and continuing just conceptually to work on the piece, we gathered again And this time with just 1 or 2 people, at the most 3, coming into Paul's space to finish the filming that hadn't been done yet, when we took a break, in order for Alex, our extraordinary designer and cinematographer and director, to then film everything and be able to make the, so to speak, product that you just saw.
So I'm going to put a couple more questions to the collaborators, and then we do starting to have questions from our from the participants. And Joseph, I'll get to your question shortly. This is for Margie or the dancers. Could you share some of the prompts that shaped or informed the movement, and how that you created, and how you interacted with the other dancers? And this could be any of the dancers who are here could answer that, or Margie could give it a start.
Oh, I think the dancers, I just talked. Does one of the dancers just want to say where you started? And
Sure, I'll start off because that's my job. We started a long time ago dealing with, starting with imagery with a Vitruvian Man, and kind of the idea behind this kind of older representation of humans and, you know, anatomy and all those kinds of things. And over the course of the year, as everyone knows, a lot of stuff happened, you know, a lot of things dealing with human rights, a lot of things dealing with health and safety, a lot of things dealing with all sorts of different things. And I think as time went on over the course of these past months, a lot of our ideas shift, as is natural with any course and process. But for me personally, it really became about this, the idea of communication and missed communications, where I think through Zoom and through all these different formats that we're not used to, I think there was a lot of just misconnections in a human way, dealing with dancers who always connect with our bodies. Now we didn't have that. So it was a huge learning process for myself. And I hope in a lot of the movement and the choreography that all the different things that happened over the course of the year kind of are represented there. But at the same time, for me, I know for me at the forefront, it was this idea, this idea of just missing someone. And it was a bit of frustrating at times, and also, you know, quite productive for making movement.
Any other dancers want to add to that? Because I know there were different prompts that that I believe you were working with to make that happen. Also, you could also, I think, Kelly, I think, touched on this, but I was astonished at the dancer's ability to make something with like a duet with somebody who wasn't there, wasn't actually in the same space. And I wonder, was there anything, obviously that had to have been, as Kelly said, a difficult thing to overcome. Was there actually anything liberating in that? Or was there something that you learned or felt like it informed the piece in a different way because you were not actually physically in the same space at the same time? I'm particularly struck by what Corey and Norma did, because they made a duet where they never were in the same room together, as far as I know. And I just wondered, was there anything good about that process?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, actually, just working off of what Kelly was saying, for me personally, this whole process was good in the sense of finding some self-discovery in terms of movement. And I think we're all used to being in the room together and creating in such close proximity. And this opportunity lent itself to me to actually think about, to go deeper and think about my own, to not have the group to maybe rely on or to lean on, but to try to figure things out on my own and maybe find a more authentic way of moving. And then later in the process, kind of trading information with Norma, kind of by that point, I think we both had distinct movement and we were able to really share back and forth. So I think personally, I think it lent for a more rewarding process in the end.
So were you actually Zooming together at the same time often?
We were towards the end because we were kind of going back and forth about when and where to do things, and we kind of started to coordinate a little bit more as the duet and solos developed.
So you started generating material somewhat independently or entirely independently,
Right.
and then
right.
merged the two later in the process.
Exactly. Yeah.
Were you working from a shared prompt, or did you have different prompts for that?
I think our prompts may have been different. I feel like I was working on some solo material for quite a bit of time. So I was kind of had kind of my own ideas. I was working with a list of words and I was working with kind of 3 different distinct phrases of movement. And then 2 of those kind of got more developed and reworked into this solo.
And that was those were personal prompts that the Norma wasn't aware
Right.
of those.
Right.
So I would, if a dancer doesn't want to jump in here, please do.
Paul, I will for a moment.
Thank you, Dalton.
Yeah, no worries. And maybe I'll bring Chin Chin in if she's around too. We worked, so Chin Chin and I were the duet. She was virtual, I was live. And we worked actually live together to create the movement. But what made it really stand out for this piece was in collaboration with Alex and looking at the text specifically. And when Alex told us, okay, what the space would look like, that's when we were able to say, okay, these 4 panels will exist in the space, and then we can play with that concept. So having the tech, having Alex and collaborating in that way, also in a very filmic manner, helped to really expand what, the possibilities of our simple relationship at the beginning.
There's been some questions from the audience about, Chin Chin, please, if you have something, please elaborate on that.
I think Dalton covered it all. It definitely was, the fun part is going through the stage of working together and then separate that and then watch Dalton working through the video by himself to find that synchronicity between us and
which didn't always happen, but
yes, and also this idea of this remembering somebody's internal clock, internal metronome. So tracing back to that memory of somebody's speed after the video was recorded was, I think, a big part of what Dalton had to work through. So it was beautiful to see how it came all together at the end.
We have a couple of questions about the Alex and Kelly duet, which is where those 2 were the only point in the piece where the dancers were actually physically touching. And I wonder if either of you could comment on that. And also, if you're familiar with the Jenkins Dance Company's work, there is always a lot of touching, and there's a lot of kinesthetic transfer of energy that literally comes from physical contact. So I was wondering, how was it for you as dancers to be making, often like CD made a 7-minute solo, and that's that's a significant difference from the way the Jenkins Company usually develops the material. Anybody would like to comment on that? CD, if you would say something, that would be great.
Well, I don't know if she's around, but I can comment on the duet. The only physical contact in the piece, I guess it helps when you're dating your partner and you're in the same bubble. So yeah, it was very interesting because I remember when I first saw the video on screen, it was a little, I was taken aback, even though I knew it was myself and I knew it was Alex. We don't see it so often, even if you're watching like a TV show on Netflix or something like that. I think the hugs and the handshakes they become a little bit startling. And there was a question of, should we wear a mask because we're close together? Should we not wear a mask? Is it important? I think the that kind of touch that we made in the duet is very significant in a way that it shows the intimacy, but it also shows when there's this kind of constant caressing, hugging that becomes soft, a little bit more violent. There's it's going back to what I said earlier. It's almost about that connection and that misconnection, how that touch can almost seem like you're not touching. I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, that's what it was for me.
Thanks. I wanted to ask Rindy and Michael a question about, can you tell us something about how the two of you worked together to create what seems to be, at least on the surface, two different approaches to how text works in the overall work. We have Rindy's character as the janitor and often speaking in first person, and then we have these much more poetic representations of the moment. Could you maybe describe a little bit about how you put those together and how that character emerged?
Well, the character, first of all, of the sweeper, as we called him, was initiated by Rindy, and then we worked together to find the logic of that, to emphasize the curious isolation in which this person who's performing these janitorial functions in a deserted office building. Everyone has fled because of the COVID. And here he is alone reflecting on the ruins in a certain way. So we worked together to articulate that. And for example, I thought of the idea of him finding these Post-it notes and scattered pieces of paper on which people had written memoranda to themselves, and him speculating on that. And so we tried to develop the character in this curious time frame in which we've all been living, in a kind of catastrophic emptiness, but also a person who still has presence. Rindy and I have worked together a number of times over the years, and the interesting thing is about the texts that you heard throughout is that we tend to take on each other's voice a little bit. In other words, when I'm working with Rindy, I always try to echo him in the texts I develop. And Rindy does some of the same, as he said before. And that same thing happened here to some degree. And we wanted to find texts that would offer a kind of, I don't want to say necessarily a narrative, because this isn't a logical continuum, but would spotlight certain moods, modalities that had to do with the theme of being at the boundaries and trying to breathe at those boundaries, and being at once isolated and connected, and being in a box and freeing oneself from a box. All of these thematic elements that pass through the work, to see if we could give it a kind of semantic base, so to speak, that would be resonant.
Rindy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No. No, I mean, Michael's covered it pretty well. I think one of the things that I thought the custodial character might convey as a kind of vernacular. So there'd be a kind of juxtaposition between the poetic and the vernacular. And so we would emphasize even in the approach to language, we would emphasize the division between something that's out of the body and something that's within a context, within a very specific body. So, and we get that idea of the disembodied, and again, as Kelly was talking about, that idea of the connection, of a kind of misconnection, but as Michael said, it's, I'm very influenced by Michael when I'm working with Michael. So it's a lovely thing to be, actually.
When a question for you again, Rindy. Now so Rindy in this piece, he's writing text, he's a dancer, he's an actor, and he's also a musician. You heard his voice and accordion and percussion playing. in the course of the musical score. But in terms of how you worked on your movement, did you, like particularly you had a duet with Kelly, had you copied some of the dancers' movement? Had you sort of tried to integrate that? Or was Kelly taking your movement? How did that dialogue work?
Kelly and I got together, and it seemed, since we didn't have a whole lot of time, and I'm not, I don't think like a dancer in that I have difficulty remembering sequences of movement. So when the dancers work with me, they're very forgiving of me. But I had, of course, watched all of them work, and I've watched Margie's work for a long time, and I have. So I bring a certain kind of my own, let's say, personal physical wisdom to the thing. And Kelly and I decided that maybe the best idea was if he was mirroring me. And there's a sense in which Kelly is kind of my mirror in the entire piece. We're dressed in a very similar way, and we each we mimic each other's movements in a number of instances. And in the end, the last gesture that I have and the last gesture that he has is exactly the same. So the feeling is that there's this kind of surrogate character, that there's a mirror character, there's a shadow character that I think is a little bit implied, but not explicit. And Kelly, you want to say something?
Yeah, it's also the importance of the haircut that connects us.
Exactly.
And Corey.
You know it.
I had a question for Marg, that because the international collaborators are not here, because there was a question about the box, about the box piece that came from Israel. And did you, in talking to our international collaborators, did you give them any prompts, or what did you offer to them that shaped in any way the contribution that they made? Because the box is so vivid, and the confinement that was also the woman in the window. There was both of these have such a sense of confinement. So I'm wondering if did that come of their response, or was that something that we offered them?
When we started working with them and knew obviously that it was going to be live stream, I sent them a series of prompts, which, in part had been some of the dancers in the United States prompts, which was, we talked a lot about the nature of confinement and what it meant to different people to be, at home and in this kind of relationship to self and community that continues now for all of us, that is so unique, and the nature of isolation, and some of the imagery and words that came from us all talking to each other. There were very kind of descriptive words that people shared with each other about how they felt about being in this kind of state of confinement. And so when I wrote to the international folks, I really said that, I was interested in having them respond to what has it been like for them during COVID? Obviously this pandemic is not isolated to this country, and each one of their countries is experiencing it, very dramatically. And I wanted them to kind of respond to, what they're feeling about what's going on in their own countries, what they're feeling about having to be in isolation. One of the dancers, the dancer in the box, Irit, has a couple of kids, and what was it like and what was going on there, and also giving them the option to respond past what my prompts were to how they were feeling and are feeling about what's going on politically in their own cultures at this time. But I did give them, a very specific kind of container, which was to talk about this container through their physical action. And so Irit coming back with her contribution of being in that box was really, I think, in response to that prompt. And Nitzan, who was in the very opening of the the film this evening was The Woman in the Window. And each one of those women had sent us much longer excerpts that we, excerpted from for this piece. But she had a whole other take about the nature of light and the confinement in that particular space. So each one of the dancers from each one of the countries really responded in the way that they felt it was affecting them. And the two dancers from India that you see in the evening, each one of them hasn't been able to leave his or her home since the beginning of COVID. So they've had almost no capacity to move. So you saw them in their actual homes, the film itself.
Thanks for that. I mean, in case you're not aware of this, this piece is kind of connected to a piece that Margie will be producing, the company will be producing within probably a year and a half, called Global Moves. And that is also going to more flesh out this collaboration with our international dancers. What form that takes at this point, but still to be determined. There's been a number of questions about the music, so I guess that's kind of to me and to Joel. And I thought I might, take over here a little bit and just say a few things about the music. Martin, longtime Margie Jenkins, the Jenkins Company dancer. Martin, great to see that you joined us. Asked about the process of making it, and Tanya London asked a similar kind of question. And so basically, when you make a large work with Margie, you hit it from a lot of different angles. You don't, sometimes one writes the music first and the dancers respond to it. Sometimes I respond specifically to a request that the dancer might have. Sometimes those two things are hopscotching back and forth. It's a process that's multifaceted. In this case, two large musical sections were composed already, had existed as works that I had already composed for as concert works, and then offered them to Margie just because I thought that they were pieces that felt like they would be strong for choreography. And so that was the opening piano cello duet, performed amazingly by Ashley Bathgate on cello and Lisa Moore on piano, a piece remarkably called Close and Personal. And then, and the only alteration we made to that piece is we cut in sections of Michael's text, sort of the initial poetic text in the work, the text called Spiral. And I was able to edit the music. I had to expand the music actually because the dance totaled more time than the concert composition. So I actually found a few sections that I could loop effectively without sort of breaking up the integrity of the music. And then the other one that CD danced to, the beautiful CD solo that was a solo cello. It's called a solo cello piece, but in fact, it actually has accompanied by both Joel DeVille and Mario Mucho on keyboard and Joel on mallet percussion. The other sections are much more open-ended and much more respond to the dance. In the case of like the Kelly-Alex duo, that they had just suggested it would be, they thought that natural sounds might be effective, the sound of fire or the sound of wind or water. So my collaborator Joel, who is, I believe, still here with us this evening, he actually, using his remarkable instrument, the Marimba Lumina, and his control of electronic media, was able to come up with a whole panoply of sounds that subtly sort of refer to nature without being precisely or explicitly, in most cases, natural sounds. And I created some of my own sounds that were electronic, but could be heard as wind or could be heard as fire, that kind of thing. Joel, is there something you might want to add to that? To how you sort of...
Sure, I could actually, and if people want to know sort of how some of that happens, I could put a link in the chat to how, like, I'll just do that real quick. Oops, I don't have it. I'll copy and paste it in a second. But anyway, I'll copy and paste that. But the idea, what was nice is, so on my instrument, I can treat it a little bit like a mixer. You could tell I could pitch bend things and I can play around with multiple timbres simultaneously. And so what was nice is we could, you would see us sometimes superimposed on the image. Sometimes you'd see us looking straight ahead, or for me, you'd see me looking to the right. We're actually watching the dancers. We had a screen in front of us, but they were also down below deck. We were up on a higher deck, in case some people may not realize we were in the room at the same time with a number of these events. And so I would look down to see what Rindy was doing, how his movements are going, or if there was a cue, or just to get inspiration for how we would adapt the piece. How, because the natural sounds in particular, obviously there's no score. We're creating little events, and we're bringing things in as it feels, however it feels natural. But we're naturally feels natural. But anyway, there's ways that we're manipulating and working with the dancers directly that may not be obvious when you're watching it. In particular, like when I was doing Rindy and Kelly were out there doing theirs. I'm playing vibraphone and some other sounds on my instrument, looking at the screen, looking to the right at what they're doing, and trying to respond. So a lot of what we're doing live is obviously the things we're responding to. We're just doing it from a distance, which we can handle. So I guess, I don't know. What else is there?
That's it. The music can be approached in a lot of different ways, and we shape the durations really with the dance and that kind of thing. I just wanted to also, because Alex Nichols is not able to join us here, I really need to say that Alex Nichols was a very major part of this, and I think all the collaborators would second this. He really conceived of so much of the environment with which the work that you saw was performed. He acted as the cinematographer. He was the editor. He scripted the camera angles. He had it all worked out. First, he had it all worked out for a live stream and for doing it as a live stream. And then he had to completely retool it as a film thing that he had to then go and edit together. So really what we experienced here was so much of it, Alex's brilliance, his artistry. And I just we had to acknowledge that because it was so much a part of making this whole process happen. I think it's probably, we've gotten over 30 minutes here now. I think it's about time to wrap it up. Really want to thank everyone here. Margie, is there something you'd like to say in closing?
Well, I would just say that, like any work that we make, or any of the artists watching, I'm sure know, you start one place and then you end up, so to speak, somewhere else. And I think this has been, an extraordinarily unique journey for all of us, definitely not uncomplicated. And not with, all kinds of tensions and concerns for not only people's emotional health, but physical health and philosophical health. And I think we've had to kind of come up against all kinds of things, not only within ourselves, but in relationship to each other. That has been a real challenge. And I think the lessons learned, I think, will continue to unfold and reveal themselves as we go forward. And as Rindy said, in a comment a while back, we're all awaiting embrace. And I think that we all, as a group of human beings, and artists, essential artists, are waiting for that time where we can embrace on kind of many levels, not just physically, but, embrace in the same space intellectually and aesthetically. And I just want to thank all the people that are here, the artists that made the work, and the artists that brought their, varying points of view and asked the really hard questions of me and one another in the making of this work. I know it was not an easy journey, and I appreciate the commitment that everybody made to making it happen.
Thanks, Marg. I wanted to just add, maybe as a coda to this, this collaboration, the principal collaborators who were not on stage except for Rindy, were all part of a seminal work that we all made together called The Gates in 1993. And a major part of The Gates was a wonderful dancer named Kathleen Hermsdorf. And Kathleen, of course, went on to extraordinary work in her, as an artist herself, after she left the Jenkins Company. but she was a critical part of making the gates. And I have such vivid memories of so many moments that she was on stage for. And Kathleen sadly passed actually while we were, in the final weeks of rehearsal on this piece. And so in some ways, I just want to, this piece also, for me, is connected to the memory of Kathleen and her extraordinary dancing. And so I hope everybody here has a wonderful new year. Thank you for joining us, and keep your eyes and ears and email open for information about Global Moves. And Margie, anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
I would just love to encourage you, if you were so moved tonight, to donate to the company and to help support these amazing people that you're looking at here, without whom nothing exists. And your donations go to these essential artists. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess we'll say goodnight and thank you all, and hope to see you again soon somewhere.
Thank you, Paul.
Good night.